Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Concordia Live. My name is Joe Milbank, one of Concordia's programming associates, and I'm so pleased to have you all here with us today. A special thank you to our global patron member, Amazon Web Services, for organizing today's important discussion. Amazon Web Services is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud, offering over 200 fully featured services from data centers globally. Millions of customers, including the fastest growing startups, largest enterprises, and leading government agencies, are using AWS to lower costs, become more agile, and innovate faster. From personalized fundraising and marketing campaigns to reducing IT expenditure to scaling programs and services, cloud technology can streamline operational efficiency and amplify an organization's impact. But it's not always clear where or how to start. In today's Concordia Live, we will explore how two nonprofits design their cloud roadmaps, starting small, and then scale their programming to amplify conservation efforts and reach more learners than ever before. A few quick housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees are automatically muted upon entry, but we hope that you'll take advantage of the chat feature to introduce yourself, react to comments in the discussion, and engage throughout the conversation. To ask a question, please utilize this same chat function at the bottom of your screen. Our moderator will do her best to answer all questions at the end of the session. If there is not enough time for your question to be answered, an email address will be provided in the chat for you to reach out to with your question. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and available on Concordia's webpage and YouTube channel. Now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce today's moderator, Sterrin, Senior Director and Nonprofit Industry Advisor at Salesforce. A nationally recognized leader in the nonprofit community, Sterrin has nearly 3 decades of experience in service to philanthropy, with particular emphasis and passion for transformational giving. Sterrin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Welcome, everyone. So pleased to be with you this morning in California, this afternoon back east. And thrilled to be joining this conversation with Lori and Steve to hear about the transformation journey that their organizations went on alongside their partner AWS and, of course, Salesforce as well. I think just to set the table here and really set the tone for the conversation, I think that it's not lost on any of us, particularly in the nonprofit sector, that we are in the midst coming out of the COVID pandemic and, of course, looking at much uncertainty in the world, that we're in the midst of what I would refer to as a data revolution, that we are being encouraged as a sector writ large to really have command of our data and really an understanding of our operations to generate operational efficiencies, to raise more money, to measure our impact, and really to tell the stories of the incredible work that nonprofit organizations are doing around the world. So with that, today's discussion is really going to highlight the incredible work of NatureServe and the Barnes Foundation, which by design actually are 2 very different organizations that have been on transformational journeys around their cloud technology. And today's conversation is really an invitation for this entire audience to get curious about what that journey might look like for their organization and to ask the questions and to explore what it might look like for your organization to lean into this work, no matter where you are on that data revolution or on that transformational journey as well. And of course, our partners at AWS and my colleague Ben here will do a fantastic job of explaining to us really sort of the wonderful tenets and pillars of what it takes to do a cloud transformation in a way that is not only meaningful and impactful, but also inclusive of the stakeholders in your organization to really affect the most, I guess, for lack of a better expression, the most thorough outcomes and really the most seamless journey for those of you that are, considering this work at this point. So that's enough from me. We're going to jump right into this conversation. And in order to do that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about themselves, their role at their organizations, and perhaps most importantly, closest to my heart, is what your organizations do so that those in the audience can really have an appreciation for both NatureServe and the Barnes Foundation as we consider this conversation. So without further ado, Lori, can you jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and about NatureServe?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Lori Scott. I'm the CIO and Vice President for Technology and Partnerships at NatureServe. We are a biodiversity conservation nonprofit. We leverage science, data, and technology to inform conservation of imperiled species and ecosystems throughout North America. I've been in my role, which is focused on technology, for over 23 years with NatureServe, and really excited to talk today since technology is such a core part of our mission and my role at the organization, and we're somewhat unique among, I think, nonprofits in how much of our mission does focus on using technology to advance our mission.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. And Steve, tell us about yourself and about the Barnes Foundation.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Brady, Deputy Director for Digital Initiatives and CTO at the Barnes Foundation. The Barnes is a 100-year-old educational foundation. Our founder, Dr. Albert C. Barnes, believed that art had the power to improve minds and transform lives, and that learning about art wasn't just an esoteric activity, but taught people how to see the world around them. Our educational programs are based on his teachings and our one-of-a-kind collection, which includes paintings by several notable artists, African masks, Amish furniture, Greek antiquities, and a really interesting mix-up, and coincidentally, more Cézannes than all of Paris and more Renoirs than anywhere else in the world.
That's amazing. I'm struck by the intersection of the two missions of this organization. It's about the Barnes Foundation really inviting people to understand the world around them around art, and NatureServe really holding space for and celebrating the natural world. So this is really this is going to be a great conversation. So thank you both. And then without further ado, our friend Ben from AWS is going to introduce himself and his role. And then Ben is going to jump right into the conversation so that we can just get started and really dig in. So Ben, please let us know about you and the work that AWS does.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Sterrin. So hello, everyone. My name is Ben Turnbull. My role is solutions architect on our public sector team at AWS, and I focus specifically on working with nonprofits. So as a solutions architect, my role is really to kind of take a step back, understand the goals and the missions of the customer, and then connect that to technology and services in the cloud. So thank you, Sterrin. I think I'd like to start with a couple slides just to make sure we all have a common definition of cloud computing. I know in the audience today, everyone's at a different stage on their cloud journey. So I'll make sure we define what is cloud computing, what is the cloud. I'll also share a little bit about why folks and businesses are choosing to move to the cloud, the advantages of a cloud environment. And then I'll share the adoption framework that teams use to help them conceptualize onboarding to the cloud. And we just heard from Steve and Lori. We have two amazing organizations, NatureServe and the Barnes Foundation, and they're here to share concrete experiences about those specific phases of adoption and make it more real to folks who are new to the cloud on what that actually looks like. So with that, I'll jump into some slides. Should come up in just a moment. All right, so we'll start with what is the cloud? And I like to start with a graphic for this because it helps differentiate traditional environments from a cloud computing environment. At its core, cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of IT over the internet. And if you compare that to a traditional environment on the left, which is on-premise, often shortened to on-prem, as we refer to it, you have a very hardware-driven environment. You have servers, storage, databases. This is physical equipment that's stored on racks. It's locally on site, and you connect to that infrastructure over your corporate network, over your local network. Alternatively, on the right, you have cloud computing. And this allows you to interface with those same resources, your servers, your storage, your apps, your DBs. You resource with them not as hardware, but as software. So you're connecting over the internet and exchanging and scaling and provisioning that infrastructure as opposed to procuring it physically on an on-site environment. So I wanted to make sure we understood that sentiment of the traditional IT versus a cloud environment. The big difference as well is you're on the hook for maintaining, hosting, managing that infrastructure on-prem. In the cloud, it's maintained, owned, hosted by our cloud provider, like AWS, for example. So that's a really quick high level, what is the cloud, but why the cloud? Why are folks moving to the cloud? What's the advantage? So I want to introduce 6 core advantages to a cloud environment, and we'll start with cost. So what cloud allows you to do is trade that capital expense for variable expense or operating expense. Instead of raising and investing in upfront capital to build IT, you can pay as you go with the cloud. You can provision resources as you need them. Second is you can benefit from the economies of scale. So these cloud providers have hundreds of thousands of resources available, and because of that, they're able to reduce the prices given that scale that allow customers to more easily onboard to these environments. Third is you don't have to guess about capacity. So in the past, you had to make sure you knew what you're forecasting and expected because you're going to purchase a physical piece of hardware. In the cloud, you can scale up and down on demand. So you can flex to meet those, hard to guess forecasts of capacity as you're going in the cloud environment. Another key piece, and this is probably the main driver for a lot of folks as they onboard to the cloud, is speed and agility. So not only of the equipment to be given to you, in the cloud, you can provision servers in seconds versus weeks or months to get it physically. It also increases the ability to innovate for your team itself. This is connected, but this is helping you, the cloud helps you focus on what matters. So all that overhead of managing the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure is removed when it can be maintained and hosted by a cloud provider. And that allows your team to actually focus on what matters, which is your business and the actual capability of what drives your mission or drives your business itself. And then lastly is this idea of the IT landscape being able to be provisioned in any region of the world in a given moment. So what the cloud allows you to do is, there's hosted environments all over the world, and you can deploy your workloads in those environments without needing to have physical equipment there. So these are the common reasons that folks move to a cloud environment. But now the big question is how? How do people get started? Where do they begin? Who do they involve? And that's where the cloud adoption framework comes in. So this is a framework that we use at AWS to help folks get started and approach the adoption phase. So there are 4 phases within this life cycle of adoption. There's the envisioning stage, the alignment, launching, and scaling. And when you think about this framework, you often think about this as a technology problem or in the realm of a digital transformation or a technology solution that will fix everything for us. But there's really 2 distinct categories of the adoption journey. And the first is focused on people, process, and culture. And the second piece is technology. So I drew this line in the middle to differentiate. Envision and alignment is really that people-driven, business-driven discussion and realization of what you're trying to achieve. And then the technology and the planning for the IT itself comes in that second phase, which is the launching and the scaling. So digital transformation is not an IT decision, it's a business decision, and this framework takes that into account. So we'll use this framework in the conversation today. Steve and Lori, we're going to share more of the concrete examples from the customer experience from their experience rather in NatureServe and the Barnes Foundation. So I'll move to introduce these first 2 components, the envision and the align, on kind of that cultural and business focused element. And then I'll turn it over to Sterrin for the discussion portion. So when we talk about envisioning and aligning, within the envision phase, this is where you are identifying and prioritizing your business goals across all the stakeholders in your business. You are capturing the outcomes that are going to demonstrate value from a digital transformation or from that cloud adoption. And then as you move to the alignment phase, you start to identify gaps and dependencies in your business. You align those stakeholders in your business on the actions that you need to achieve for a digital transformation. And this is really about cloud readiness and aligning your business to start that journey onto the technical side. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sterrin to lead a discussion about these first 2 phases of the cloud adoption framework.
Thanks, Ben. I'm struck by a couple of things that you said that I'd just love to double click on. The first being that the process of a cloud transformation journey is just that. It's a journey and not a destination. And, back to highlighting something I said at the top of the hour, that this is really the process of going through this as an organization is really a living and dynamic process. And it's an invitation to really examine your people and your processes, and then really take a look at how does then technology exist in service of the business that the organization is doing. So I love the way you frame that out for us, particularly as we jump into envision and align. Because I think that many of us in the nonprofit sector in particular, when we think about technology, we think about products and service and the stuff and the what is it. And we think about that's what the actual technology is. But in the end, or not in the end, but in the beginning and throughout the entire process, really, it's about why must we do this? What is it about the process of innovation and transformation that enables us to continue to do the work that we do in more effective ways, particularly as we think about scale and we think about our new ways of working? So, for me, that comes down to the very simple question, why? Why do we want to change? Why do we want to move towards this kind of work? And so with that, Steve, I want to throw this first question to you, if I may. Can you talk a little bit about the Barnes Foundation's why and how you began this process and this journey?
Sure. Our why started about 6 or 7 years ago, and we were looking at a decision point to replace a old aging monolithic web service that had a bunch of things bundled into it. It had our main website, it had our collection online, it had a significant portion of our ticketing all locked into a single resource and environment. And so our journey began, as a lot, I'm sure, do, with working with partners and consultants. And as we started to develop the new system, we started to look at the benefits that, kind of Ben showed on the earlier slide, of starting to decouple and break down that monolith into smaller, more manageable pieces and separate those concerns. And so we were, over time, with those partners, was our first foray into the cloud and into AWS. And, and then over time, as we started to adjust to that environment, we really were able to understand and look further in and understand where the additional values and benefits would be to us.
Interesting. So it's not about tackling all things right out of the gate. It's really an iterative process and a determination of where your organization is and then ultimately where to start. And so with that, it's kind of an interesting segue for this next question. For you, Lori, although we're talking about the envision stage, which often many of us take into account the entire vision for our organizations, and of course, it's also the first phase on the roadmap that AWS so eloquently explained to us. We know there really just isn't one starting place when you begin a journey like this. A cloud journey can be, or should be, frankly, an iterative process. Can you share, Lori, how NatureServe approached this work and what that initial phase has evolved into?
Sure. Yeah. Like Steve, our journey started a while ago. I would say 10 years ago, we got our feet wet with the cloud. And we started with a small project, pretty typical nonprofit project. We had a need to completely redesign our website. So we knew we wanted to take that small step and move our primary public website and CRM out to the cloud. So we did that as part of the, upfront design. But once we got our bearings, we had an immediate, we saw the immediate value and ROI of moving to the cloud. So we made the decision, we had a pile of servers, on-prem servers, and in different ages. So we decided that everything new would be designed for the cloud. And then we knew we could do that at a pace that we could manage with our capacity. We're not a huge technology shop, and work through them in the priority order that we could to shift our systems from on-prem to the cloud in increasing levels of complexity and sophistication. And we also do a lot of work with external partners. And so I found that it was really easy to get alignment with those external projects around a well-defined scope of work. We're being, consulting with those partners to do that work. Where I think it got a little more challenging as we got to the more complex internal legacy systems that we relied upon. We were sold on the business proposition of moving to the cloud, but we've had to work out a way to phase that at a level that our resources could afford to do it and our capacity could afford to do it. So we've sort of chopped up some of the roadmap into phases that we could concretely execute over a series of years.
So I'm struck by a couple of things that you both said in terms of your use, the expression "we're better together," and the notion that you both used external partners as well as relied on internal stakeholders and alignment to move the process forward, particularly as it relates to the envision phase of this. That I'm also struck that often it's easier for groups to get aligned around the vision. But then when you move from envision to align and you really are getting into roadmap and brass tacks around doing that's where some of the friction might occur, particularly internal to the organization, determining priorities, roadmap, timing, pace of change, etc. So as we say, all of us say, it's certainly executive alignment when approaching transformation inside any organization, but I would argue particularly in nonprofit organizations is crucial to be able to move forward and not swamp the boat as you're trying to manage change. So let's talk and let's double click into the align portion of this. Because I think we can imagine what it takes to envision, and then the practicality of getting aligned internally is a very real challenge. So once the goals are established and the vision is agreed to, organizations still have to create that internal buy-in and that internal executive alignment with their business teams and have them ready then to move into these next phases of launch and scale. How did you identify those business goals that aligned with your cloud adoption? And how did you create that alignment internal to your organizations? Lori, do you want to jump back in here and talk a little bit about that for NatureServe?
Sure. We had success. We actually worked with Amazon and their nonprofit team who they facilitated for us a full day envisioning workshop. So this framework that Ben was describing, we went through that as a business, and we got alignment by convening leadership and all levels of the organization, but across all the different units of NatureServe to really get consensus around those high level outcomes and look at the enabling technologies the cloud would bring to bear on those challenges. And we are, now implementing, as I mentioned, this roadmap in phases. So it was really helpful to sort of have a facilitator help that's been through that process with dozens and dozens of other nonprofits and can sort of help steer that alignment process. It brings a little objectivity, I found, and just helps you have a little confidence that you're going on the right track.
Well, and I think applause to Amazon certainly for creating that kind of environment and safe space. It allows you as an organization to let the process be really inclusive, and at the same point invites and creates safe space for people to ask the questions that they need to ask to really create that ongoing alignment. That's really interesting, and little clap for Amazon here. Steve, let's kick it to you in terms of how the Barnes Foundation developed that same muscle and expertise inside your organization. And then also, how did you bring your people along to develop their expertise around this? How was Amazon and your partners supportive to you and your organization in that process?
Sure. So as with all projects with a discrete scope, especially when you're working with outside consultants, for cost and calendar reasons, the project does have to come to a close. And we thought it was a smart idea to hire our first internal developer who could also handle the operation of the cloud. So in that way, we were able to get a maintainable system, as well as take those pieces of scope that may have fallen off earlier in the project, and work on those internally to complete them. And then as we started to, again, understand this new architecture, this new environment, we saw where at the edges we could continue to make iterative improvements to systems that were very cost effective and very mission driven and oriented, and were able to drive results. So we ended up over time, I won't get jump too far ahead into the second half of cloud adoption, but again, there was just this iterative approach to being able to understand how to do things at a very economical cost to internally, and to provide great outcome externally.
Excellent. So thank you for that. So I think as we wrap sort of the envision and align portion of this conversation, I've heard stakeholder alignment. I've heard inclusion without actually, including the stakeholders in your organization to really rally around what's important. And ultimately, that's all about the why. Why are we doing this? How is it impacting our work? How is it impacting our organization? And ultimately, how will it impact the communities and the missions of the organizations that we support and that we lead? So thank you for that. I think, Ben, now you're going to take us through phases 3 and 4 and jump into launch and scale.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Sterrin. And I think just to piggyback off of what everyone has said thus far, is that this framework is iterative. It's not a begin here and end there. You can start in the middle or come back to the beginning. And I mean, we recommend getting the business on board. So this piece, vision and align, is key to begin with. But in terms of iterating through this, it's cyclical. So I just want to reiterate that as well. And now we'll push to that next phase. So this now is in the technological portion of the framework, where we start to look at launching and scaling. So in the launching phase, it's where you're starting to consider pilots, you're starting to consider projects, and making sure those projects demonstrate business value that align back with the prioritized goals. So making sure you're pursuing things to begin with that can continue developing that buy-in from the business stakeholders, and starting to understand how it would look in your organization technologically. And then the scale piece is intuitive. This is scaling to production and making sure you're capturing benefits and business value as you move ahead in your development in the cloud. And I wanted to double click into this phase, because in this technology phase, there's also a level deeper that kind of traces how organizations flow through this second half of the framework. And this is a kind of a classic journey that we see in the cloud, where we start on the left, and this is the experimentation. Yeah, a great graphic here of an actual sandbox. You've got a sandbox environment. You've got start with projects and POCs. And from there, you can start to build your foundation in the cloud. Maybe you start in a hybrid approach. You start with the migration. So you start pulling in infrastructure and IT into a cloud environment. Ultimately, starting to modernize your applications and your stacks, looking at cloud native opportunities as opposed to building first on-prem, start building first in a cloud environment. And then ultimately evaluating any implementation and development in this reinvention or cloud first approach. So that's the path that we often see customers go through within the launch and scale portion of the framework. And with that, I'd love to turn it back over to Sterrin and the team to talk through their experiences.
So we have our stakeholders aligned. The vision is there. We are ready to develop and deploy the technology. But as I understand it, first we have to pilot and demonstrate that success to not only make sure that we don't break anything, but more importantly, that we bring our stakeholders along on this journey. So Steve, let's talk a little bit about how developing that cloud database to store information about your collection in particular provided the catalyst to continue to iterate and grow with technology, not only among your team, but of course, along your business stakeholders. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So again, when we did that first migration project and upgrade, we brought our collection online with a kind of standalone database. And then that allowed us to take all of the metadata about our collection and the images and high resolution stored of our collection that were already in the AWS cloud, and to build new tools to bring that out in more ways to our audience. So while the collection was geared at an online audience, our galleries are unique in that there's no didactics on the wall, which means there's no titles, there's no artist names, there's no descriptions of why that's there like you would see in a traditional hang or a more modern hang. And so we developed an application on top of that database that allows you to scan any one of our 3,000 objects on display and identify it within about 2 or 3 seconds and get all of that metadata. So again, we built that database once for our online collection, and we were able to use it twice for our in-gallery experience, and we have gone back to that several times, and now we're actually continuing to build a visual experience platform for learning online, again based on the same collection data that's in that database.
I suppose I will say this to my friends at Amazon. I think that's part of why we say Amazon Imagine, because you do it once and then you can do it twice, and then you can continue to imagine what's possible once you've made that leap into the cloud. So thank you for sharing that, Steve. I really appreciate it. Lori, can you talk to us about something similar? NatureServe is, leading habitat modeling using artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'm guessing that's not necessarily how this project started, and given all of the conversation around AI and machine learning right now, can you talk us through how that began and what it looks like now for NatureServe?
Yeah. So the thing that's pretty unique about NatureServe, in order to deliver our mission, we partner with a large network of biodiversity experts throughout North America. So we have partnered for 50 years with state agencies, provincial agencies in US and Canada, and they're the leading sources of information on which biodiversity occurs in their jurisdictions, where to find it, how it's doing. And so we've been doing this mapping for 50 years. So that started on paper, and it's followed the arc of technology evolution. And so we had these best available maps showing where to find these at-risk species, but we knew it was incomplete. As good as it was, we couldn't visit every location to survey. And so we saw the potential once we got our big data into the cloud to say, hey, there's some cool tools here that can help us make some inferences on this best available data and fill in those gaps. So we started using advanced ecological modeling techniques to develop more accurate predictions based on our known occurrence data of where else species are likely to occur. So that did start small. It started out in the States with some of our leading partners and experts. And what NatureServe did, it came in and it helped scale those pilot efforts quickly using the cloud. So we built a cloud hub that allowed us to do collaborative habitat modeling. So that meant, models are just a hypothesis. So we can really improve those models iteratively by bringing all the experts together through this convened collaboration space in the cloud. And we can do, more efficient work by sharing all the hundreds of high resolution environmental data layers, and having a model review tool that experts can give their feedback and allow us to iterate and improve those models. So the result, we got very quickly over 2,000 high resolution models of the most imperiled species in the United States. Stacking those models together, we created a map of biodiversity importance that's really, shining a light on where the places of importance for biodiversity that should be protected to prevent further extinction.
I'm so struck by the additional, and again, back to the Amazon Imagine comment, just to imagine what happens when you're able to aggregate data sets in that regard to see the habitat models across different species. I'm struck by the idea that the same could be done in any cancer research or other organizations in terms of aggregating data in that way, maintaining the security and privacy of said data, but also increasing those data sets in a way that you can see things leveraging AI and machine learning that perhaps would have taken years to examine across multiple data sets previously. So as I imagine that with you, Lori, if you could, I'm just curious, how is NatureServe sharing this knowledge with other organizations, peer organizations, and impacting that global space, leveraging the cloud? I mean, how does an open source model advance the work of your organizations? And frankly, how are you leading the way for other organizations as well in this space?
Sure. Yeah. So we do publish data, open data, and APIs. So, we can have the best available searchable website. NatureServe Explorer gets our data out there, and we try to drive traffic to it. But ultimately, we're going to be successful if we deliver that data through an API and let other partners who need to use that data integrate it and combine it with their data and make new discoveries. So that's one important way. Being scientists, we also publish in the peer-reviewed literature to have that authoritative reach among the scientific community, and we also aim to get our data published in the popular press too, to raise awareness of the biodiversity crisis. So we've been fortunate to have some pickup of this map of biodiversity importance in places like the New York Times, which reaches a much bigger audience than more esoteric scientific journal, or our website, which you have to know to find. But we do deliver through our tech partners as well. They have channels that have been really helpful to reach a wider audience. Yeah, those are a few of the ways.
I'm just curious, Steve, are there ways that the Barnes Foundation is doing something similar? I mean, beyond sharing your collection more broadly and doing that, how does that look in your organization?
Sure. So we are an open access collection. So we open up our APIs and our high resolution images especially for anything in the public domain for anyone on the internet to use in a way that suits them. Also, the products that we've created on our own are typically funded by external grants, but again, based in alignment with our mission, we've open sourced a lot of those tools and published them out to the world for any cultural organization, any museum to use, or any other organization that finds value in them. One of the things we have learned over time, and especially throughout the pandemic era, has been that we find in our sector, and I'm sure several others, that either the organization, the museum, defines themselves as they love the idea, but they're too small to implement, or they love the idea, but they're too large to find alignment internally. And if someone could just provide it in a turnkey fashion for them, they would be able to find that alignment. So one of the things we're doing with this current project, that we were a 2022 Imagine Grant winner for, this visual learning platform that really takes the concepts of Dr. Barnes and his peer, John Dewey at the time, and creates a very immersive, engaging learning experience that we're looking to essentially provide that as a platform to partner institutions so that they can bring their collections and their expertise, and we can provide the platform and support for them. And that way, we believe that we believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that especially in our sector, there is this forward-looking momentum of needing sustainable earned revenue streams for nonprofits. You can't just rely now or especially in the future on contributed revenue and large gifts to continue to sustain your work. So we're headed in that direction. And when we've done some cost modeling, at the scale we'd like to be with this new solution, the overhead of the cloud and AWS specifically is 1.5% of generated revenue. And if you want to compare that to something, even just credit card processing on a conservative baseline is about 2.9% per transaction. So our cloud costs, we project will be half of what our payment processing costs are. So that right there kind of gives you kind of a nice comparative view of the value that you get out of going to the cloud versus the cost of going to the cloud.
It's interesting. I've had this conversation multiple times with different sector leaders over the course of the last several weeks about the importance of decoupling value from cost. Because of course, anything, what's the old expression? Anything worth doing is hard work. And anything worth doing, frankly, of course, a transformation has cost associated with it. But the longer term value that enables both of you and your organizations to continue to iterate and continue to imagine what's possible at scale is truly, truly remarkable. So thank you for sharing those stories. We do have a couple of minutes for some questions, and there is one in the chat that I'd love to lob out to both you and Lori, if you would. What pre-work did you have to do before you got to the envision phase? For example, what kind of I think someone's looking for some tactical advice about getting cross-functional stakeholder buy-in, many of whom, and I would say as a business user, I would represent the fundraising camp, that might not have a background and really the vernacular and the vocabulary for technology. So how did you create that alignment in advance of the envision phase?
Just to go first, Lori.
Oh, sure. Well, I was going to say, for one thing, we're fortunate, I think, we're pretty technology literate staff at NatureServe just because of our mission. But I feel like the most important pre-work we did was we were fortunate in terms of the timing of the envisioning we were doing. We had just worked as an organization on a new strategic plan. So we really spent a good amount of time getting to alignment on our most important priorities for the upcoming 5 years and sort of mapping what those business goals were and our mission goals and where we were going next for the science and the technology and how those needed to come together. So that was a lot of pre-work that we could launch from there to say, okay, now here's the technology roadmap to implement that vision.
Got it.
And I would say from our perspective, I know one of Ben's initial slides showed an on-premises environment versus the cloud environment. And there's all kinds of the onion peel of the on-prem environment. There's electricity, there's heating and cooling, there's backup power. There's all kinds of capital expenditures that are covered there. So if you tactically can start with a net new project especially where the CapEx would be prohibitive, the value of the cloud can prove itself much more clearly there. And in that later diagram with the sandboxing and experimentation, there is effort involved in this and there is labor. But you can do those pilots, you can do those tests, and you can see for yourself where the value is. So from an operational standpoint, all of that CapEx going away is, and then having to refresh that on a 6-year or 10-year cycle really, starts to prove itself out. And I think the proposition for moving to the cloud is significantly different than it was 15 years ago when it felt new to most people. And I think Lori and here at the Barnes, our journeys seem to have happened right at that cusp era of the costs started to equal out and then have increasingly gone in favor of cloud for the things that we'd like to accomplish.
That's fantastic. Ben, I am going to kick I'm going to couple these two questions together, if I may, for you, because I think it would be interesting. I'm curious, Ben, how does AWS approach organizations and come alongside them in a way to really help them assess their readiness for cloud adoption? And how is it that you begin? So building on what both Lori and Steve have said about how they actually did it, how does AWS really help an organization assess their readiness? And then married to that, if you could comment on the unique value of cloud adoption as it relates to the security of data, that would be helpful. Those are those two questions, and I can remind you of them if you need them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first being, how does AWS provide structure to help folks start along
Assess their
that adoption
readiness.
journey,
Yeah.
test readiness? So it was interesting that Lori commented on some of the workshop opportunities that we have. So there's a couple opportunities. We'll send the link out as well for the actual cloud adoption framework that we shared today. And that framework has with it some very structured handheld workshop opportunities where we walk through in a day the envisioning component. And it's a very kind of business focused, objective goals, mapping those goals, sticky notes, picture that kind of classic workshopping session. And then the second day session focused on the align piece, which helps you prioritize and then match those priorities to enabling functions on the technology side. So I think in terms of like structural offerings, there are specific workshops that AWS can help customers walk through, complementary to help you get a sense of where to begin. How does cloud map to our business goals? How can the value we see from the cloud support our mission and our business? So I think that answers the first question. In terms of the second piece on the security front, a lot of folks have questions on, is the cloud secure? My environment on-prem is, I own it. I feel safer with that. But in a lot of cases, security of the cloud is more secure than what customers might be able to build out on-prem. And a lot of that it comes down to Steve mentioned, the actual hosting facilities. AWS has 24/7 monitored facilities for the actual physical hardware. We are responsible for military workloads, global banks, high sensitivity organizations. And we use the same secure hardware and software to build all of our regions. So all customers benefit from the compliance and regulations that we work through to support those highly sensitive customers. Also, like within the cloud itself, there's a vast array of services and offerings that customers can utilize and work with us to implement to make sure that their workloads themselves are secured. So I think you see a lot of opportunities actually to improve security when you move to a cloud landscape. Hope that answered the question. We can follow up for more if you're interested.
Thank you. We are coming up just about on time. And so I just want to take a minute to thank Lori and Steve and Ben for this conversation today. And I'm just, I wouldn't be a good moderator if I didn't just hold up, envision, align, launch, and scale. And that this is an invitation for any organization, regardless of the size or scope, to take a look at their data strategy and their architecture to really bolster their impact, create executive alignment, and to imagine what's possible in the cloud. So with that, I thank all of you for joining me today for this conversation, and I will turn it back over to my colleague Joe to wrap us up.
Thanks, Sterrin. On behalf of Concordia, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you especially to AWS, Sterrin, and today's esteemed panel for sharing their expertise and for walking us through their cloud technology journey. We hope you found this conversation to be insightful, and we're thrilled that you were a part of it. A follow-up email will be distributed next Thursday with the recording of today's event and the opportunity to connect with today's panel, as well as AWS to continue the discussion. Thank you again, and have a great day.